Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch-Hunter. Today, we are pleased to have as our guest James Perry, who is the District Athletic Director at the Huntington Beach Union High School District. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you, sir. It's always good to see you, man.
Let's have you start by sharing with our audience here in Utah and across the nation where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, those types of things.
I was born in the cultural center of the universe, Emporia, Kansas. Little tiny, well, at the time it was tiny. It's about 30,000 people now. Right in the middle of Kansas. My dad was a high school coach in several stops in Kansas, and later moved the family to California to take a coaching job at Long Beach State. So we grew up born in Kansas, and then kind of grew up in California in the beach areas of Southern California. Had a great opportunity to attend the University of Southern California and get a degree and play some basketball there, and just forever in debt to the university for the opportunity that it gave me. My first teaching and coaching job was right out of college. I had just finished grad school, and a gentleman that I had four teammates that had all played for this gentleman, and he found out I wanted to go into teaching and coaching, and asked if I wanted to student teach there, so I did. And then after student teaching, the superintendent was a former SC guy, and they hired me to teach health and driver's ed and be a basketball assistant. And that's where I started, the world famous Crescenta Valley High School.
Excellent. So let's go back to USC for a moment, if I may ask. So what years did you play for USC?
I practiced. I didn't get to play a whole lot. I found out very early that I wasn't nearly as good as I thought I was. But I was there from 1970 to 1974, and played with an extraordinary group of guys. One eventually has been inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, and 6, 7, 8 others all played in the league. And so I got to spend a lot of time playing in practice, but very little time on the court, and that's okay. I learned a great deal, and if I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same.
And so you, probably a painful question. So your success against UCLA during that particular period of time probably was not real good, because that
Nobody's
was
was.
their string. But
Yeah, that was a group with Walton and Greg Lee and Jamal Wilkes, and it was an extraordinary time. I mean, we had one year we only lost 2 games, and they were both to UCLA. And
UCLA, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And back in those days, the conference got one team in the tournament.
That's right. We were ranked as the number 2 team in the nation, lost 2 games, and didn't get in.
Yeah, that's crazy. So did you get a chance to go to the NIT?
The conference had a rule, and we didn't go to the NIT until we were seniors. We played in this thing called the Commissioners Cup. I think we were juniors in the Commissioners Cup in St. Louis, and we played in the NIT. I think my senior year. So,
oh, that's fascinating. So let's talk for a moment about you spent your youth sports, certainly in the Southern Cal area, and obviously you must have probably been on some travel teams or whatever, because you're skilled at basketball to get a scholarship to USC. So talk about some of your time in the youth sports.
I'm old enough that when I was playing as a kid, there was no such thing as travel team ball or club teams. We played in open gyms. We played on playgrounds. We played, fortunately, in Southern California, there are couple of 3 or 4 beach communities that had great courts that were right on the ocean, right on the beach. There were a lot of junior colleges that would open their gyms, and that's where we played. I mean, it was all playgrounds and open gyms, and it was pickup games, and you learned real quick that if you didn't win, you were sitting and waiting for 45 minutes or an hour before you got a chance to play again.
Before you got a chance to, sure.
So you played really hard, and you knew that if it was a game-winning basket, you knew you were going to get fouled, and you weren't going to call it, and you just had to learn to make plays through contact, and it was the greatest way in the world to learn to play the game.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk for a minute, James, about some of the mentors you had in your life, maybe coaches, parents, others that had an influence on you as an athlete and as an athletic director.
Well, obviously my parents, both my folks were in education. My mom was a high school counselor, and my dad was a high school coach and teacher, and then a college coach and professor. And then he actually was the athletic director at the University of Southern California for 10 years after I was done. And then so I did, but he obviously had a huge impact in what I did. I had a 6th grade teacher, a guy named Mr. Weber, that set me up to fail one day, and it changed my life. I had fooled everybody until the 6th grade that I could read, and he knew that I couldn't. And he asked me to stay after class one day, and he asked me to read a paragraph, and I couldn't do it. And he proceeded to make sure I got. At the time, they didn't know what dyslexia was. They had very little knowledge of what it was and how to treat it. But he figured it out. I mean, I had fooled everybody for 6 years except for him, and he was incredibly compassionate and incredibly patient with me, and really changed my whole direction. And guy named Ed Gorgon, who hired me right out of college at Crescenta Valley High School, in fact, we're about 20 of us are meeting with him the 15th or 14th or something like that, 11th of July. Ed was a huge influence. He was one of the open gyms that we'd play in, and I had 4 teammates that had played high school for him. Ed's one of probably the top 3-4 winningest basketball coaches in California. Had extraordinary teams, extraordinary ability to get kids to play above their level, and to be around that and be a part of that was a huge thing. There were 2 principals that I worked for that were incredibly insightful gentlemen. A guy named Scotty McTaggart, who was a former Marine, and he had the biggest bark in the whole world, and he could just light me up for something, and then 10-15 minutes later he'd call me in his office and he'd go, "Sorry, you got it, let's get on with it. We good? We're good." But an incredibly compassionate man. A guy named Jim Monahan was the longest principal I ever worked for, almost 10 years, and great builder of culture, of school culture, and getting people to buy into a culture and to buy into why we're in this, and that we're doing this for kids. And he had a great influence on me, and as far as leadership and some of those kinds of things. So probably a longer answer than you wanted.
No, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk for a moment. I'm guessing you've been an AD for close to 40 years.
Yep. 40.
Okay.
Yeah. Something like that.
So let's talk about the job of today's athletic administrator, 2022, and how is it different from when you started in 1982 as an AD?
Wow. I think there are a couple of 3 or 4 things. One is the increased public visibility. I mean, back in the early 80s, high schools weren't getting a lot of TV coverage or newspaper coverage. And if it was because you were doing really well with, obviously there was no social media and those kind of things. Parents were in a very different frame of mind in those days. It was, our kids, and I can remember moms coming in and saying, "Coach Perry, can you get my son to cut their hair?" And I said, you're his mother. I said, "Yeah, but you're his coach. He'll do what you say." And so I'll call him in, "Hey, cut your hair, clean up, get your act together." And then I'd get a phone call. "Thank you, Coach Perry. We appreciate it." And I'm thinking, oh, good grief, come on. I think that student safety, just the sheer amount of, I think when I started, we had 4, maybe 5 pieces of clearance work, a physical and a student body card and medical insurance. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And now it's we got a folder on every kid. I mean, it's parent signatures for this and heat exhaustion and concussion protocols and parent conduct, student conduct. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just that it has increased the time that ADs and their staffs have to put in to make sure kids are covered. I mean, it's. I know that every athletic director in America, on a Friday night game, a kid gets hurt, and their first thought is, "God, I hope I have his insurance. I hope I have his clearance. I hope I've got all of his medical stuff in order." Because if not, there's an attorney sitting on your doorstep on Monday morning. So
probably an attorney sitting in the stands waiting to meet the kid.
Exactly. Now, I think social media is changed our world dramatically. The way kids communicate and the way the public communicates, and the fact that every kid's got a phone and every parent's got a phone, and they're not afraid to use them. And I tell our people all the time that we now must just assume that whatever we say and do is public record, because somebody's watching us. Somebody's got a camera on. Somebody's go, "Oh, there's Coach Perry, or there's that AD, there's that guy, there's that coach. What are they doing?" And all of a sudden the camera's on, and we get phone calls the next day saying, "Here's what your coach was doing Friday night after the game." So I think that has put a huge difference in the way we approach things. Club sport, travel ball, I think, has had a huge impact on how we do business and how we deal with parents and how we deal with kids, and some of the incredibly gross misinformation that's out there to parents about the benefits of club sport, the benefits of travel teams, and just I talk to parent groups all over the country about, you've been brainwashed, you've been hoodwinked, man. They have taken you to the woodshed,
and all your money with it.
Exactly.
Let's talk for a moment about your journey in California. Well, let's talk. You've got to have been in at 40 years. You're not at the same school in the same district. So talk about some of the schools you've been to and the difference, and then we'll talk about California nationally.
I started at Crescenta Valley in Glendale, California. Spent 3 years there, and then had a great opportunity to spend 2 years at the University of Utah with Jerry Pym and his staff.
No, really? That's
yeah.
So
yeah.
Was Jim Marsh on the staff then?
Jim Marsh was one of my assistant basketball coaches when I was a freshman in college. I've known Jim since I was 18 years old. He's passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah, but, I heard that.
We were incredibly close. Very, very
so
close.
You were Utah what? It would have been late 70s?
78 to 80. We had Danny Brains and Tom
Danny Brains,
Chambers and Carl Bankowski and
Carl Bankowski from
Scott
Schenectady, New
Hill.
York. Sure.
Yeah.
I know the team. I used to work Jeff Judkins' basketball camp with Judkins.
There you go. Juddy was one of our guys. You know, the U had Ainge and all those guys and Roberts.
Yeah. And so
it was.
You were at Utah when they hosted the Final Four.
Exactly. I know exactly where my seat was.
And my seat was probably not as good as your seat. My seat was about 3 rows from the top, but of course in the special event center, that's still a pretty good seat. And of course, I'd never be able to get it now. In there.
Yeah, there's not a bad seat there.
So sorry to interrupt. So I had no idea you were at Utah. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Spent 2 years at the
connection we didn't know about. So continue.
So I have a great affection for the state of Utah and the Salt Lake Valley and the area. I value that time more than very few people know. And I came back to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles for a year, and was happy. I was doing, I was a young college coach. I thought I knew everything in the world, but I saw universities and colleges hiring coaches, head coaches, and every one of them had been a head coach at some level, and I hadn't. So I thought, I better go find out if I can coach. I know I can recruit. I know I can scout and do all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And my mom was in the Garden Grove Unified School District, and I got a call from her, and she said, "There's superintendent's going to call you and ask you some questions." I said, "All right." So the superintendent called. Actually, it was assistant superintendent, a guy named Frank Starnes, called and said, "We want you to be the basketball coach at La Quinta High School." I said, I got no desire to go back to the high school thing. And he said, just come down and meet with us. I said, okay. So we met, and I said, no, I'm not interested. And he says, well, what will it take? And so I wrote down, I can remember the list. There were 10 things on this list that I wanted and needed. I thought that to be a chance to be successful. And he and the superintendent looked at it and said, we're good. You start in a week. And I thought,
wow,
what did I do? I mean, just oh my goodness. So I spent 28 years there, and I was the head boys basketball coach and the boys and girls athletic director, and taught 3 periods of a jillion different things, physical education. I taught world history 1 year. I taught English as a second language the first time we ever offered it. The kids that had just come in from Vietnam didn't speak a word of English. Spent a lot of time in the science department with life science and health and driver's ed. So I was very content there. I thought, okay, this is where I'm going to end my career. And got a phone call one day from a guy named Greg Pletko, who had been a longtime friend and assistant superintendent in the Corona Norco Unified School District, and said that would I be interested in being the AD at Corona High School? And said, Dr. Blitko, with all respect, those positions, if I'm not mistaken, you have to be a vice principal. You have to have an administrative credential. He said, that's right, you do. And I said, I don't. And he kind of laughed and he goes, I know, but we'll get it for you. We'll take care of it. I said, that's just, Corona's 1,000 miles away. It's in a different county, and you've been in Southern California enough to know if it's in a different county, it could take you 3 weeks to get there with traffic. So
absolutely.
He said, so are you in your office? I said, yeah, I'm sitting here. And he says, okay, so just MapQuest your house to La Quinta High School where you're at. So I did. It was 26 miles. He said, now MapQuest your house to Corona High School. And I did. It was 13 miles. And I about fell out of my chair. He goes, and you're going opposite traffic. Okay, so you got my attention. Let's talk some more.
Well, in Southern California, that's a big deal.
It is. It was only 4 exits on the freeway, and it was opposite traffic. Plus, I got to spend about $30 million. They had a project plan that they didn't feel good about with who was in place, and So along with being the AD, I got to oversee the construction of a brand new football complex, football stadium, track and field, scoreboards, timing systems. We built a brand new field house complex with practice facilities for basketball and volleyball. Built a weight room that was specifically designed for our female teams and female athletes. Locker rooms for teams, coaches' locker rooms. We built a state-of-the-art athletic training facility that parents from other schools would come in if their kids had gotten hurt, and they'd look around and go, this is better than our doctor's office. We had a tremendous medical staff there. And we built a 16-lane deep water aquatic center with 12 lanes that were electronically timed with seating for 600 that was covered. They had their own locker rooms, their own coaches' offices, their own weight room facility. We did the baseball and softball. We did the football weight room. And then had all the plans done to redo the gym. We weren't going to build a new one. We were just going to completely redo the existing one. And they ran out of money, and it was time for me to try something else. We'd gone through a couple of principals, and it was my wife and I met with the state teacher's retirement, and said, this is probably a really good time to go. So I left, retired in 2013 after spending 5 years there. And 3 weeks later, the guy that hired me in Corona Norco called me. He was the superintendent of the Huntington Beach Union High School District. And Dr. Plego, what are you doing? He says, we heard you retired. I said, yeah. He says, what are you going to do now? I said, well, because I'd actually thought about it. I said, Dr. Plego, there's one of two things. I either want to find a small private school that plays 8-man football, will let me be the AD and coach basketball, and I'll be a happy guy. Or there's got to be some school districts that think, you know what, we need somebody to help us manage and mentor our high school athletic directors and act as a conduit between them and the district office. He goes, let's meet for coffee. So we did. And we kind of mapped out a little thing on a napkin. And 3 weeks after that, I was working again.
Oh, that's a great story. Since you had retired, was there a certain amount of weeks or months that you had to not work before you could get hired back into the California system?
Yeah. And fortunately for me, the district was tremendously creative on how they did it. And if this goes public and the state of California gets it, I'll probably end up in jail, but I'll tell you, I was hired as a consultant for 120 days.
Okay.
And they paid me as a consultant, an independent contractor for 128 days to do some consulting stuff. And then when that expired, I went on the payroll, and you can only make up to a certain amount of money.
Right.
If you've worked. And so they just cap me each year, slightly under what that total is. And it's been a great thing. It's really been a cool thing.
Well, I understand. When I retired, and this is back, 2013, the Salt Lake School District wanted to hire me to audit their athletic records from the 3 high schools there. And my issue was I was going to be retired, and so actually the state retirement office gave me the idea that if they hired the company and I worked for the company, then that was totally legal. And that's how my wife runs our business now, that she's the CEO of. Because, and like I say, it wasn't my idea. So that's a fascinating story. I want to talk for a minute about, and this has got to be, 10, 12 years ago when we first met, because obviously I didn't know you at the University of Utah. Did you play in the new league up there, by the way?
Yeah, we all did.
Well, yeah, because you remember Keith Henson.
Absolutely.
Who has passed away here, over maybe about a year ago or so.
Wasn't long, yeah.
Well, I was just finishing up being a student there, of course. Keith told me to come play in the new league, and I said, Keith, I suck. I can't play. He said, no, you come and play. And I would come and play, and he would pick me on his team. And the reason he would pick me on his team, because guess who would give him the rock
Heck
every
yes.
time when he wanted, and I
Heck
gave him the
yes.
rock, and he loved it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
No,
I digress.
there was some. Marsh would play. A guy named Tracy Trapuka would play. He was in Chris Hill, who became the AD there. Chris would play. We had great fun. We had some great games.
Yeah.
So
I remember it well. It was kind of out of my league, but it was fun for me. But I want to go back to when we first met. It was with, now I date myself because I call it an Aspie, because I know it's not called that anymore, because the Aford is called Shape now. So I'm not even sure if they have an Aspie or what they call it, but let's go back to that, because that was it was a great time for me. It was different from the NIAAA, but that's how you and I were able to meet.
Yeah. No, the NASP thing was a tremendous organization, and I was, like a lot of us, crushed when it got shuffled out and put in a new cat. That doesn't even exist anymore, which is a shame, because I think we did some really good things for the profession and people across the country. But that National Council of Secondary School Athletic Directors was a tremendous organization. And there was the National Coaches Council as well. And I got involved with it just by accident. The National Council of Secondary School ADs there at NASP had a conference in San Diego. Somehow I stumbled on it and went down and went to it and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the folks were really doing a good job. And a guy named Jack Acree, who was an AD in Idaho, kind of pulled me aside and said, would you be interested in getting involved, because we don't have anybody in the West and we need somebody from California. I said, sure, I'll see if I can figure it out. So that's how that started. I spent a long time there, and got a chance to meet you and a guy named D. Guard in Kansas, and Dave Stover in Iowa, and Walt Sargent, the big NIAAA guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was Doc Holliday from Oklahoma, from Jinx High School, and I had just extraordinary group of guys that we worked really hard, and we got a lot done, as you know, and just played hard too. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a great time. Graham. I just remember Timmy was there, and I just remember I spent 1 or 2 years with you, and of course it's been great because we've been friends ever since. But that's right. The great thing about the national organizations is you can meet so many people. Tell me, now that you're in your 40th year or longer, what's the favorite part of your job?
I still get a huge kick out of watching 14-year-old boys and girls turn into 18-year-old men and women. I thoroughly am captivated and just amazed at how that 4-year window becomes such a literally life-changing time for the kids in our country. I had a gentleman tell me one time in college, an old guy named J. Tillman Hall. He was a professor from a little town in Tennessee, and he said, we can do all we want, but by the time a kid's 16, he's flying by himself. He's flying solo. They're pretty much who they are and what they are by the time they're 16. And so we got a 2.5 year window to make an impact on kids, and then another 1.5 years to help polish them, to help send them out. And just that 4-year window of seeing kids go from, I have no idea what's happening, I have no idea where I'm at, I have no idea who I am, to walking off the stage with a pretty good idea who they are and a pretty good idea where they're going, and watching them turn into incredibly talented, gifted adults, and the impact that they have on our communities. Like you, I've got ex-players and ex-students that are now 64, 65 years old. I mean, I got kids that are great grandparents. And to me,
Yeah.
that's nuts. And
Yeah,
you've
it is.
got kids that are retired now. And I just go, that can't be possible.
Yeah, but that's a great observation, and that's a great way you put it about the 14 and 15-year-olds turning into grown-ups. So let's finish up with a couple of questions, James.
Sure.
The first one being, with your knowledge especially, you've got 2 suggestions for a brand new AD, and they've got to follow these suggestions in order for them to be successful. What would those 2 suggestions be?
Check your ego at the door.
I like that.
Check your ego at the door. My grandfather used to tell me, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you better find another room. And I see a lot of young people coming into the profession that think they've got all the answers. And as well as anybody, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. And
Right.
I talk to our people all the time about surrounding themselves with the smartest people they know. Find a group of mentors and use them. Talk to them, listen to them more than anything. Seek their advice and seek their wisdom, and see how it fits into what it is that situation is that you're involved in at your particular site. I think the last one is, and I tell most everybody I speak to in leadership, and that's really, have a list. My first day in Huntington Beach, I met with the principals and the ADs, and I said, okay, how about the third thing I said was, who's your next football coach? And all of them said, we got one. And I said, that's not what I asked. I said, who's your next one? Because as well as anybody, a week from now, your head football coach say, you know what? I'm taking a different job because I got a raise and I got this and I got that and I'm leaving. And all of a sudden, you need a football coach.
Absolutely.
So have a list, and I actually have a folder that, softball coaches, swimming coaches, track coaches, ADs. I mean, we had an opening in our district just recently, and we had a list of who we were interested in and might fit that particular school and that particular culture. It saves you a lot of time, a lot of headache, a lot of aggravation.
That is a great piece of advice, and I can honestly say, and I've done a few of these podcasts, over 80 now, that's the first one that said have a list. So I like that. So that's going to move up there. So let me finish with this, James. What question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
When I saw that, I kind of chuckled, because I immediately thought of 2 things. It was, given a chance, would I do this all over again?
Well, would you?
And a flipping New York second.
Okay.
It's been the greatest adventure and the greatest just life experience that I could possibly hope for.
Sure.
And I think the other one was, if I hadn't have done this, what would I have done instead? What direction my life would have gone? And I had, when I graduated from college, I had all intentions of becoming a fighter pilot in the United States Navy, and had literally passed all the courses and everything, and went down to the Miramar Air Station in San Diego to take a visual acuity test. And they found out I was colorblind. And they said, well, you can't fly jets, but you can fly cargo planes. And I said, nah, if I can't fly fast and upside down, I got no desire. So
you said, if I can't be Maverick or Goose, I'm out.
There you go, baby. There you go.
Well, that's awesome. I didn't know that. So thanks so much for sharing. That wraps it up for this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our guest has been James Perry, the District Athletic Director at the Huntington Beach Union High School District, which absolutely has to be the longest title that I've run across. But thanks so much, James, for being on the podcast today.
Mark, thanks a million, man. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you.
And for our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.